lovely to be back. It's my first time back for ages, since before Christmas. Remember that scary time in school before Christmas? Well, you weren't so nervous, but the staff were. I was nervous. And wow, what an outcome, eh? What a result. Your school's outstanding. We all knew it anyway, didn't we? It's just that they didn't know it in London. But now even they know it in London. Yeah, so your reputation precedes you. Now, this time of year, it's such an important time to Christians, the lead up to Easter. But you know what? Before the very first Easter, it wasn't in the diary. It wasn't on the calendars because it hadn't happened. Only one person knew, and that was Jesus. He knew it was coming. Well, and of course his Father, because his Father had planned it. And Jesus told people what would happen at Easter, but they either didn't get it, or they didn't believe it. It was just too much, too strange. They couldn't accept this. After it happened, they remembered what he'd said. And they were filled with awe that this had been the plan all along. I'm going to start a few weeks before Easter, something eye-popping that happened in the life of Jesus, that his disciples saw, and one of them, called John, wrote it down. And you'll find this story in John's Gospel. Christians don't think it's just a story. They believe it is more than that. They believe it's an eyewitness account written by somebody who was there, so that we can believe ourselves. You have to make up your own minds. What we do know is that shortly before Good Friday, Jesus was with his disciples somewhere over the hills in a distant village. One day a messenger arrived with some sad news. Oh, nobody likes to get sad news. This was very sad news. One of Jesus' friends, called Lazarus, was gravely ill, seriously ill. So ill, they didn't send for the doctors, they sent for Jesus. But Jesus didn't do what the messenger maybe hoped. He didn't leave everything and go with the messenger. He stayed where he was for another few days. And then he said to the disciples, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. We must go and wake him up. Oh, the disciples were a bit confused. Surely you should leave him. Don't wake him up, and then he'll get better. I think they thought that Lazarus had a touch of man flu, and he needed a couple of duvet days to get better. But it was more than that. In fact, Jesus was speaking figuratively. That means he was using a picture. He was painting a picture of Lazarus being asleep to actually mean something else. You could say he was using a euphemism. Has anyone heard of a euphemism? Have you? Okay, cool. For those of you who don't know, a euphemism is when you use a nice way to say something not so nice. A pleasant way of describing something that's much harder to say. So those of you who can think deeply, put your hand up and tell me, what was he actually meaning? What had happened to Lazarus?
Not dead.
Oh, well done. House point for you. Lazarus was dead. Even I find that word so hard to say. We don't like that word, do we? Oh, so off they set on the journey. And they arrived 2 days later in the village of Bethany, near Jerusalem, where Lazarus had lived. When Jesus got there, he could see that everybody was very, very upset. Not surprising, really. You know, everybody finds death very hard. If you know somebody elderly who's died, you might have known them your whole life. And then the idea that they're not there anymore is very hard to deal with. It's even harder if someone young dies, because it feels so unfair, so unjust. They haven't lived their whole life. And so it was with Lazarus. They were finding this very hard. One of Lazarus' sisters greeted Jesus. She came to see him. She had mixed emotions. Of course she was pleased to see Jesus. But she said, if only you'd arrived earlier, then my brother wouldn't have died. Jesus turned to her and said, your brother will rise again. She said, I know that one day, at the end of all things, on the last day, in the resurrection, my brother will rise again. Oh, there's a big word. Resurrection. Remember, Easter hadn't yet happened. What does resurrection mean? Yes. From the dead. Well done, that definitely gets a house point. Resurrection. You see, Christians and Jews believe that on the last day, at the end of all time, everybody who's ever lived and left this earth will rise again and stand before God and see Him and have to explain how they've lived their lives. That's called the resurrection. But Jesus meant something else. He said to Mary something that shocked anyone who was listening. He said to Mary, I am the resurrection and the life. If anybody believes in me, even if they die, then this will happen. Let's have a look. The first two key words. Now remember, don't call out. Do the sounds in your head. Put your hands up if you can read these two words. And this is very precious to Christians. So Jesus said, if anybody believes in me, even if they die, then this will happen. Hands up. Yes.
Live again.
Well done. House point for you. Let's say it together.
Live again.
People were quite surprised to hear Jesus say this. They didn't understand. What on earth does it mean? Jesus asked the sister outright, do you believe this? That she was on a journey of faith herself. She looked in her heart, she turned to Jesus, and she said, I've got the first two words here. Let's have a look at her reply. Hands up. She said to Jesus, yes. Oh, well done, but what's the first word? One letter. Can you see it right at the end? Ah, well done. House point for you. Let's say it together.
I believe.
She said, I believe that you are the Messiah, God's special messenger, His Son sent to us from heaven. She was on a real journey of faith. Jesus said to her and the others, take me to where Lazarus is buried. And so off they set. Maybe they thought that Jesus wanted to pay his respects, to mourn and to grieve. Some of you will know this, that in our culture, after somebody has died, and maybe after the funeral, the loved ones like to go maybe to the place of burial or cremation, or a place of special memory, and put flowers, or leave pictures, or messages, or candles, and sit, or kneel, or stand, or pray, and just remember the happy times. It's part of the grieving process. It's very important for some people to do. But Jesus didn't have that in mind. He knew something else was God's will. Now, a large crowd also followed because there were people visiting the family from all over the area. They'd even come from Jerusalem, just 2 miles away, like from here to Hucklecote. And when they saw Jesus leave, they all followed, wondering what was going to happen. Let's paint in some of the crowd. And there they stood in the cemetery. Now I should explain at this point that in that country, in those days, they didn't bury people in the ground. The ground was too rocky and too dry. They had a different custom. They did what the Romans often did, and I've seen one of these. It's really something to see how the Romans did this. They would find a cave. If they couldn't find a cave, then they would chisel out a new one, and they called it a tomb. And then they would put the body in the tomb, and then they would roll a big stone over the front to keep out wild animals and for privacy and decency, you know. And Lazarus was buried in such a tomb, and there they stood opposite the tomb. When Jesus saw how sad they were, it says that he also was filled with compassion and wept. And then he said something that utterly shocked everybody. He told them to roll away the stone. No, you mustn't. It was against all that they held dear, against all their customs, against everything they thought was decent and proper. No, you mustn't. He's been in there for 4 days. If you roll away the stone, it will not be very nice. You know what they meant, don't you? Yeah. Jesus said to them, if you believe, then you will see the glory of God. They didn't understand, but they trusted and they did it. And sometimes, you know, we can do that. We don't understand everything, but we can trust. So they rolled away the stone, which of course left a terrible sight. The sight of an open grave or tomb. I don't think many people wanted to look inside. It was against everything they thought was proper. They stared at Jesus, wondering what on earth this was all about. Jesus stood opposite the tomb and did something else unusual. He prayed aloud and said in a loud voice, oh, the reason he didn't often do this was because he taught that prayer is something you don't do for show. You do it privately at home, between you and God, because God will listen to our prayers. Although at school and church we can come together and pray as a family. This time he stood there and prayed aloud. Father. Oh, who was he talking to?
Uncle.
He was. Fantastic answer. How's fun for you? Now you're used to this, but they were not used to that in those days. They weren't used to anyone calling God their Father. They thought it was disrespectful, cheeky, blasphemy. But he continued, Father, thank you for hearing my prayer. I know you always hear my prayer. I'm not saying this for my benefit, but for everybody here, so that they will know that you have sent me. And with all eyes fixed on him, you could have heard a pin drop. He turned and pointed into the tomb and said in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! People stared in disbelief, wondering if Jesus had really gone mad. Imagine their response as from the back of the tomb, out of the shadows, stepped the figure of a young man with hands bandaged, his feet bandaged, and his head. And the people gawped as they recognized the figure of Lazarus. Show me on your faces the looks you would have had if you'd been there on 3. 1, 2, 3. Yes, house point for you. That's a good face. All Jesus said was, well, take off his bandages and let him go. I want you to imagine you were there that day. Your friends and family weren't there. What would you now be itching to do? What would you be thinking, I've got to go and... Absolutely, tell everybody. You couldn't keep that secret. People legged it home and they couldn't keep it in. Can you imagine your friend arrives home from Bethany? You won't believe what I've just seen. You can see it on their face as they blurt out, you know Lazarus, the guy who died? Yeah? Well, he's not dead anymore. What? How can he not be dead anymore? That's how it might have been. You want to believe because you can see it on your friend's face, but you might need a bit more, come on, what might you say to yourself? You need a bit more? Fantastic, good word, proof. Point for that. Can you think of another word for proof? Oh, fantastic. House one for that one. Proof or evidence. People came from all over the area. They came to Bethany to go. They looked in the tomb. They went to Lazarus' house. You're there. I think he got fed up with people poking him to check he wasn't a ghost. These days, you'd have all turned up and said, smile, Lazarus, we're having a selfie. Yeah, but they couldn't do that. When the news got to the chief priests in Jerusalem, they were enraged. They were filled with jealousy. Because of this miracle, many people started to believe that Jesus was God's Son, the Messiah. And the priest said, we've got to stop this! This is awful! Because they didn't believe it. And they didn't want anyone else to. So they got together and they plotted something wicked. What can we do to stop this? Yes, we're going to kill Lazarus. I know. You can't believe that people would ever plot something so wicked, but they did. However, they didn't succeed. And so, a few weeks later, that plotting gained momentum. They were frenzied. They had Jesus arrested. And they accused him of saying something wicked, that he was God's son, when they didn't believe he was. And so they had him arrested. They took him up a hill just 2 miles from this miracle. And there, on a Roman cross, he died. But he had said to everybody, I'm going to die on the cross. But it's God's plan, not man's idea. But on the 3rd day, I will rise again. And this is God's plan, so that everyone's sins can be forgiven, if they will believe. And on the 3rd day, when the disciples went to pay their respects and to mourn Jesus, they found another stone rolled away, another empty tomb. And the Roman guards, who were posted to make sure Jesus wasn't stolen from the grave, and they pretended he'd risen, the guards were sat on the ground, white as a sheet, shaking with fear. And when people asked them what happened, they said a man with clothes as bright as lightning came and rolled a stone away. So, lots to think about. 2 stories for the price of 1 at Easter time. Lots to think about. I know the bell's gone, and I've got carried away as usual. Do we have time for a quick song?
We need to go out to play on the
Oh, okay.
otherwise
We'll
the
do
children won't like us very much.
prayer?
But it's a fantastic ending, because actually on Wednesday we're going to see Year 6, aren't we? And they do this amazing Easter dance called He's Alive, and it is absolutely fabulous.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
That'd be lovely.
The girls...
Finish with a prayer.
Oh, they've chosen a really super prayer. We're going to do the beginning and the end. And these words are fabulous.
Easter, Jesus was given over to die because of our sins and was raised to life to put us right with God for a moment. Jesus our Lord, we praise you, but nothing could keep you dead in the grave. You are stronger than death and the devil. Help us to remember that there is nothing to be afraid of, because you are alive and by our side.
Amen. Very much. Sorry for going on. See you after Easter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ray.